If you don't mind, just start with your name and your title.
Okay. I'm David Brunick, and I am owner and chief clinician for LA Mental Health.
What is your experience in the youth mental health or teen mental health space?
Well, I would say that when I very first became a therapist, I was in Colorado judicial system where I saw kids who had a choice to either see me as a therapist or get punished through the judicial system, sometimes facing jail. So very wisely, they chose me, and most of the time. And I really got to see a wide variety of kids, in all the way from about 6 years old, believe it or not, from getting a ticket for TPing, to gang members for any number of violent crimes or other things, and everything in between. And I saw teens all the way up to 19 or 20. And then I also, in private practice, ended up seeing mostly teens and young adults. So that's where I had my most of my experience with teens.
Can you just help set the stage for the biggest issues that you see when it comes to teen mental health today?
Yeah, well, I'm going to state the obvious, which is it's really hard to be a teen right now. And I have raised 3 kids that are adults, and I have a teenager now. And I would say just over the 10-year span that I had between my oldest and my youngest, things have just changed, and it is harder to be a kid. I think social media plays a big part in that. And we talk about social media a lot, but kids, and especially teens, compare themselves to everybody else to determine their personal value and how the people or the world around them value them or think about them. And when you see perfect images that get caught on social media, or you see friends doing things without you, or you even get direct messages that suggest you have no value, it's easy for teens to believe that. And so I think that it's just become a natural part of their everyday life. Most of the time they have their phones at school. They certainly have them at home. They have them on their breaks. I see teenagers in my house with my own kids that are talking to each other while they're sitting on the same couch through their devices. And so it's just an appendage, and it has so much influence on self-esteem, how they think about themselves, and whether or not they have any value.
Do you think that's like it sounds like that's the biggest issue. Are there any other issues that come along in that 10-year gap that you mentioned between your oldest and youngest? Is there anything else that you're seeing, or is social media really like the thing?
Yeah, I do think it's the thing. I'm trying to think if there are differences that I've noticed between then and now. The other thing that I would say is, and people might argue this one way or the other, but I do think we know from studies that the middle class is shrinking. And so there's a more stark difference between wealth and poverty in our school systems. There's not the sort of thing where when my older kids went, it was about the same throughout the school. My current 13-year-old sees a very wide range of income. And it does feel stark, and it does start to feel like I'm different if I have less. And that comparison of what they have as teenagers, once again, goes back to whether or not they have value.
Something that PBS 12 has brought up to us is this idea that people generally like to hear like statistics on what some of the major issues are. Do you happen to have any of those off the top of your head that you wouldn't mind running through?
I can talk about a few different things that I think are compelling. I think they're good news is Colorado measures a lot of things through Medicaid and Medicare, and so they have a lot of good statistics about access to care and who is and who isn't getting care. So does SAMHSA and a few others. But what we know about teens is that at least 20% of all teens would like to go to therapy. And we also know that only about half end up in therapy. And that's difficult to hear because we also know from research and studies that therapy works. It helps kids get through a very difficult time in their life. And the other thing we know kind of about the brain of a teenager is that the frontal lobe doesn't continue or doesn't finish developing until they're 25 or 30 years old. That's where all reasoning occurs. It's where all decision making happens. It's where impulse control gets developed. So when you think about a teenager, that part of their brain isn't engaged. It means they have to rely a lot on community, parents, their friends who are a little more stable and highly functioning, and therapy to kind of guard them against what is a very emotionally based brain, and that's the limbic system. And that's where our fear is, that's where our joy is. And you see teens in that, and it's kind of fun to watch. Their extremeness, their extreme joy and their extreme fear. And the thing that gets scary about things like suicide, and we've seen that rise so substantially in our teens, especially during COVID, when that limbic system part of the brain is in charge, it thinks the worst. It does catastrophizing. And it really believes that the worst case scenario is going to happen because there's not that developed sort of impulse control and other things. So what we find statistically and in reality, and I've seen it personally, is that therapy matters because we can help kids start to develop that part of the brain, create some paths in that brain that creates protective factors. So we can work with a kid who's been thinking about suicide, put a plan together, write it down, let them refer to it. Think about their protective factors. Who are the friends that care about them the most that they can talk to, reach out to? Certainly parents. Parents can sometimes be the most important protective factor, but not always. It can be an aunt, it can be an uncle, it can be somebody from the community center. But helping them identify that because their brain isn't going to connect to that on their own. So it also kind of builds some muscle for their adult lives, builds some resilience. We know that when teens build resilience during their teens, it becomes a competency they have for the rest of their life. So I think we in therapy and therapists try really hard to build that resilience. That's a protective factor during the really hard times when they start to feel like they have no value, and that limbic system of the brain takes over and says, that's just true. You have no value. And there's no thinking, there's no reasoning. It just feels like a fact. And so it's challenging. And then, like I said before, we know statistically that the internet, social media, other factors exacerbate that so badly for teens and make it even more true because that emotional part is reinforced by, see, it says so right there. My friends are saying it. There's a lot of factors behind teens who want therapy and don't actually get it, the 50% who don't go. One is awareness. So awareness is key. The teen, whether or not they even know therapy would help or that it's available, keeps them from coming. And if you don't know that you're struggling and therapy can help, you're not even going to think of it as a choice. And I think the other is stigma. Stigma is interesting because it's the stigma the kid might hold. If I go to therapy, my friends might think I'm crazy, or my family might think I'm not grateful, or whatever it might be. But there's also the stigma that the parents hold. And my teen son has a friend. He recommended that this friend go get therapy, and she said, I've asked my parents, and they said no, because what it shows is I have no gratitude for everything I've been given. And it becomes more of a suggestion there's something wrong with the kid, that they're not grateful, that they need support, that they need something more than their family can give. And so they get the stigma and that overlay from the parents. I don't fault the parents. It's not critical. I'm not trying to be critical of the parent. They're doing the best they know how, and that's what they believe. But we've got to overcome that, because the thing that I know is that with my 13-year-old, he's in therapy. He's a great kid. He's got a lot of great strengths, and he's struggling. And I would say that he can say things to his therapist that he won't say to me. I'm his dad, and I am a therapist. And he won't say things to me that he can say to his therapist. And he finds it very helpful and enjoys the time. He looks forward to it. If we miss a week, he notices. But I think if he didn't know that we found therapy to be a very normal thing, he would be reluctant to go. And so the way I look at it is this, and people react differently when I say this. When I say that all 4 of my kids have been in therapy, some react by saying, oh my God, what did you do to those poor kids? Others, though, and this is the healthy response I want to see in society, which is if I say I took all 4 of my kids to a pediatrician for wellness care, or when they got a cold, or got them antibiotics for strep, they would say, oh, what a great dad. He loves his kids. I want it to be the same way. I want people to say when a parent gets their kids into therapy, they love their kids. And that's my vision for where we're going to get to eventually, that people can see it and feel it the same way.
Can you talk about the number of mental health care providers that we have available to teens in Colorado? Is there a deficit?
Yeah, the statistic I heard, and I don't have anything to back it up, but I think it came from the state of Colorado, is that if you doubled the number of therapists in the state of Colorado, we wouldn't have enough. The good news is programs across the state are graduating more and more therapists. And I think the other thing that I'm grateful for is those programs are teaching skills. They're evidence-based and that we know work. So it isn't voodoo. It isn't anything more than some basic skills and some, in certain cases, in difficult cases, some advanced skills that are applied that work. We know they work. And so they're graduating more and more sophisticated therapists, and we're seeing more of them. But it's still a shortage. As somebody who manages multiple clinics, and we have 10 to 12 therapists per clinic, it is hard to find therapists, especially if you're looking for those who know how to get results with their patients and can describe that. And if you're particular, you work hard and long to find good therapists.
It's okay if you don't feel comfortable touching on this. It might not be your area necessarily, but can you talk about access to mental health care in rural communities?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Yeah. So, access to care in rural communities is near to my heart and important. It is so challenging, and it's challenging for a number of reasons. I have clinics in a number of rural areas, including Cheyenne, Wyoming, where it is a common phrase to say cowboy up. It's like saying man up. It's like saying you should ignore anything breaking your heart, breaking your soul, breaking your spirit, and just cowboy up. Get through it, power through it. So the stigma is very powerful there. The other thing is in rural areas, I find it an interesting challenge because if there is a therapist in town, they're usually sitting next to them in the pew at church or running into them at the dry cleaners. And it's difficult to bare your soul and talk about the things at the core of who you are with your neighbor. And you don't know if they're going to talk to other people. You may trust them implicitly, but that is hard. I think the thing that I love about technology and media in general is now I do think teletherapy works. I've seen it work. And while we're located in Cheyenne, we're able to see people on telehealth in Casper and Wheatland and Rock Springs and other places where they would have zero access. And I prefer to meet somebody in person initially. I think clients like to. But they are willing, in lieu of nothing, to do therapy over telehealth. And studies are showing it's just as effective.
Yeah. And that's relatively new since the pandemic, is that right?
It is.
It was before the pandemic, but that's really what created the surge in interest and access to telehealth?
Yeah, that, and I think another really important thing, which is insurance started covering telehealth where it didn't before. And it was a temporary measure by insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, and TRICARE during the pandemic, but then they left it in place. We couldn't get paid for a telephone session or telehealth session by insurance or Medicaid or Medicare at all. So we were doing it for free. Or people had to pay out of pocket. And that's prohibitive for most people.
So speaking of insurance companies, do they pay for mental health access now, regardless of whether we're talking about telehealth or not? What is the ratio of insurance companies paying for mental health care, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, let me talk about mental health care and how it gets paid for and how it's evolved over time and in comparison to other health. So you've got medical health that in the 40s and 50s started to cover medical health through employers, through Medicaid and Medicare. Before that, only the rich could do medical care. But they didn't bring mental health care in, so you still had to be quite wealthy to do mental health care out of pocket. It really wasn't until starting about the 90s, when the Mental Health Care Parity Act came into place, that insurance payers were required to pay similar to or equal to medical health. It didn't happen. It took a lot of lawsuits. And then the Affordable Care Act came, and it really changed things substantially. It made mental health care coverable by Medicaid and really required that the exchanges do the same thing. What that means is that when I negotiated contracts just 6 years ago, we would get $70 a session, which doesn't even cover our costs. Whether you're an independent therapist or you're a clinic like we are, it doesn't cover costs. And just in those 6 years now in the state of Colorado, it's $125 to $135 a session. That's sustainable. It's still not parity to medical health. They're getting that for 15 minutes time, at times 4 for an hour. But we're getting closer. And so it's the last remaining barrier to care. And we're finally breaking through. So our clinics take just about every kind of insurance, including Medicaid, Medicare, and TRICARE, which is for military. And why that's so important to me is it finally allows people to come in like they do with their doctor, make a copay, go in and get care, and not have to choose between, $120 for groceries or $120 for a session that week. That's the last remaining barrier in my mind. We still have stigma. We still have lack of awareness, two critical barriers, but we're working on that. Affordability is just a really, really key issue, and it is very much a blocker to care.
In our initial call, I think you gave the analogy of putting the head back on the body.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that
analogy?
And can you give that again and just explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, we are finally realizing that mental health is health. I think for a long time we believed that health was the physical body. And we're finally putting the head back on the body, and we're thinking about them combined. And we should be, because that's our whole self. And we're starting to treat the human person as a whole body, their brain and the rest of their body. And it I think, is becoming more evident to doctors, other medical professionals, clergy, and others that mental health drives health. And so it's got to be, for many people, it should be treated. For some people, they just want to be treated so that they can be their best selves, have the highest level of life satisfaction and highest level of functioning. If your liver isn't functioning, you get medications so that you're functioning. If your emotions are out of whack and not functioning, we want you to get mental health care so that you can function again.
Because of what you were already talking about with the brain and the functioning of the brain and how the brain develops and how it's not fully developed as a teen, can you bring in the aspect of why that's especially important to get mental health care access to teens?
Yeah, and so because we put the mind and body together now, we realize that the brain operates the rest of the body, and it's not fully developed for teens. So what that really means is that if a therapist knows and is working with a teen with a brain that isn't fully developed, that they're going to try to create capability in that part of the brain. It's like working out. Build that muscle like you would a kid who, you get into sports so they develop physical muscle. Therapists work to build that part of the brain and build that muscle capability and resilience that they're not going to naturally have. You can speed that development up or create that capability for kids.
Can you explain prevention and intervention and the difference between them and why one might be more important than the other?
Yeah. So prevention is an interesting thing. I had my own teenage boy come to me after his girlfriend broke up with him, 13 years old, and said, "My mentals aren't okay." That's not something I taught him. It's something he learned in school. That's prevention. His school cared enough about mental health that they gave him some vocabulary for not being okay emotionally. And that led me to know he needed some support. That is prevention. Now, an intervention then is sometimes preventative because you get in before it becomes very, very serious, before he starts to think about suicide as a choice. And so therapy itself or an intervention can be preventative. But I think most people think of an intervention or treatment as the point at which it's become an interference to functioning, to life satisfaction. And you have to do something a little more long-term and a little more kind of invasive to treat trauma, the effects of trauma, and how to recover from trauma, as an example. That's more of an intervention. The thing has happened.
Thank you. I'd imagine that for parents who aren't therapists, or parents who have never been to therapy or don't consider therapy, that having their child come to them and say that their emotionals or their, what was this? Mentals were not okay.
Yeah.
That might be hard for them to hear. They wouldn't know necessarily what to say in that situation or do in that situation. How can parents, first of all, set their child up to be comfortable enough to come to them in that situation? And then what can they do in that situation?
Yeah, so I think it's really natural or normal for parents to panic when their kids tell them that they're not okay emotionally. And the first thing I would say is try not to panic. It's kind of a normal and natural thing. And kids take their cues from their parents. It's sort of like the first time they skin their knee. If they're like me, they panic when they see blood and they make the situation worse. What you want to do with emotional situations is create safety. Don't overreact. Hear them out. Know that there are ways to help the kid that's struggling. I think parents oftentimes with mental health immediately believe it's their fault, that they're to blame, that's a reflection on them as a parent. And I can tell them it is not. They are good parents. They're doing exactly what they know how to do. And sometimes if they can just realize, just like they can't treat strep, they can't treat depression. And therapists can. And so just try to take a breath, step back, create safety, hear them out, let them know that there is an answer, there is a place to get support and care, and that they'll get it for them.
Can we dive into that analogy a little bit more of the skinned knee? Can you explain the different types of parents that there are for the skinned knee, and then relate that to it being the same with mental health?
Yeah, I think that the skin knee analogy is an interesting one because there's different ways parents can react to that, and one is to panic with them. And my experience is, being somebody who can panic when my kid skins their knee, is that it makes it worse. There are those who just tell their kid to shake it off and move on, and if it's a boy, man up. That can sometimes dismiss the fact that it hurts, and it doesn't acknowledge the fact that there's pain. And then there's kind of the middle of the road, which is not overreacting, acknowledging that it hurts, letting them know it's going to be okay, and helping them move on. If they need a Band-Aid to stop the bleeding, do that. If they need to see a doctor, do that. But let them know it's going to be okay, and that you're going to make sure it's okay.
And how does that relate to mental health?
So it's very much the same way with mental health. Not panicking, not overreacting, because you will make it worse. Just like with a skinned knee, kids will sometimes look at their parents to see if they're hurt, to even know how they should react. If the parent looks calm, they oftentimes will just get up and move on. If the parent looks panicked, they panic. So with mental health, if you're reacting as a parent with calm, you're listening, you're understanding the pain, and giving them a sense that it's going to be okay, and they see those cues, they believe that.
In that initial phone call that we had, you really validated the presence and the strength of social media in young kids' lives. You said that that's their lenses to the world, and it's how they're heard and seen. And I thought that you put that in a really beautiful way, because we can really beat up social media, and there are certainly some issues, but also it's it is something that they're going to use. They're probably not going to give it up anytime soon. And so, and then in addition to that, you also said that it can quickly become everything to them if the parents don't have a role within that.
Yeah, so I would say social media is here to, for probably forever, for whatever forever is, but it is with us to stay. And so it's like most things, we've got to decide how they affect our kids, how we create exposure, when we create exposure, what we hope they have exposure to, limit what they have exposure to as much as you can, because you can't control everything. And I also think that while social media is addictive, we know from studies that it has the same effect on the brain as any other addictive substance. We can do certain things as parents to help them avoid addiction to things that are that change our brain, that trigger that joy sensor that teenagers live off of. And that means things like what party do you go to and whether there'll be alcohol there. And you cannot prevent your kid from drinking all the time, but you can prevent opportunities for it and different things like that, and react to it and support the kid when you find out they have. Help them create choices. The other thing is that I think social media can serve good because it is the lens through which kids see the world. And so we can access those things in social media that have positive impact. We have people in, popular media where teenage actors, singers, rock stars, even rap stars are starting to talk about mental health, talking about going to their therapist. Simone Biles talked about seeing her therapist before she competed in the Olympics, and that it had all the effect in the world on her performance, which was excellent. What she said was the mental fitness matters as much as the physical fitness. That went viral. What a powerful thing for kids to know that this young woman, saw her therapist so she could perform at her best. So I just think there's a lot that we can do with social media. I think we should all influence it, and we should highlight those things, point our kids to those things. We don't think our kids are always listening to us, and sometimes they're not. But oftentimes they're listening when you don't know it. And so it's worth saying it. Even if you think it's on deaf ears, just say it.
What's an example of something that they can say?
I think that if you can talk to your kids about things like drugs and alcohol in a calm way, and the things that they can be good for, social relaxation. You can explain why you as an adult have a glass of wine. And you can also explain to them what happens when that becomes 6 glasses of wine every night. And, some ideas behind why that happens to people and how it happens to people and how to prevent it. How to use things that bring joy responsibly and differently so they don't become addictive.
I love that idea. It's like disarming.
Yeah.
To talk about both its benefits and its negatives.
Yeah. Well, social anxiety is real, and who doesn't want to have some relief from that? And so what you hope is you teach kids social skills that allow them to be successful in social environments where they don't need alcohol, even if the rest of the kids are, or smoking weed or whatever they choose. They feel so comfortable in their own social skills. They get the reactions they want from their friends without using, even though they are. That sometimes kids don't even know is a possibility.
Is it true, it's okay if you don't know this is just something that I've heard, is it true that kids are drinking less alcohol these days? And maybe that's because they're using other substances. But
Yeah, I've heard the kids are drinking less, but I don't know that for a fact. I haven't seen any statistics on it. I also know, young adults are using marijuana or weed far more often than alcohol, because it's their drug of choice, their social drug of choice. I know that with my adult kids, in my day, I would have come to somebody's house with a nice bottle of wine. They come with a nice whatever it is of weed. and that's how they socialize. Nothing wrong with it. It is, if it helps them responsibly and in a healthy way interact and enjoy their social time together, I think it's a great thing. It can be a great thing.
So you introduced us to Alejandro, who we loved getting to know. I don't know if you know him.
I don't know him,
okay.
no, yeah.
He, and I guess you saw from the rough cut his story about his parents' divorce really affecting his mental health. I would be really curious to hear your thoughts on the effect that divorce can have. I think he was 7 when they got divorced.
Mm-hmm.
The effects that the splitting up of like a strong parental family unit can have on a young person, and I guess to go along with that, talk about the importance of a strong parental unit.
Yeah. Well, divorce is not anything that's new. It's been around a long time. And it is just as common today as it has been for a long time. I think what's happening that's different is parents are learning that they can handle and guide their kids through divorce differently than we've seen handled in the past and in so many dysfunctional ways. Traditionally, people think about divorce as the divorced people want to be as far apart from each other as they can, and they stop co-parenting. And so you may have 2 perfectly lovely people individually who, are wounded from that marital experience. And they have 2 choices, really. That is, they work together to kind of heal those wounds and learn to co-parent so the kids can be healthy through that divorce, or continue to play that conflict out through their kids. And when they make that choice, they're making a choice to continue to wound their kids and themselves. And then the kids feel very lonely, and they feel like they have to do that on their own. And that's unfortunate. There are more people today, and I like to say this, who get into therapy, especially the adult parents, and they come to some agreements on how they're going to put the kid first. And they can do that any number of ways. I have seen families who celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah together in the same home every year, so they still have that. And yet live in separate homes and talk about the transition between homes every week or every 3 days, whatever the plan is. Help them through that transition every time. It's a tough one. And, let them know that while the relationship between their parents ended, it doesn't have to be viewed as a failure. It doesn't have to be a reflection on the kid. And that they can go on and be healthy and happy in both homes. You can talk openly about how each parent parents differently and how it's going to be different from home to home, so they don't have to be confused. There's just a lot of things that adults can and should do for their kids during divorce. The other thing I would say, that I've seen most commonly with kids, especially teens, is they blame themselves. And they will hold that as truth until their parents tell them differently. and they need to do that.
Parents want to know, like when their kid is struggling, parents want to know, is my kid's curiosity, exploration, individuation normal? And what is normal?
Mm-hmm.
And what becomes dysfunctional for kids? You want watch points for when they've crossed into dangerous mental health issues. Can you talk about that and and maybe what parents might do when they're questioning, is this normal or not?
Yeah. So teens are an interesting group of people because they are experimenting with the world. They're starting to do things away from their parents, and that's natural and normal and healthy. We want them to do that. It's part of individuation. Seeing themselves as separate from their parents. And that's where they start to develop skills and prepare to be an adult, make some mistakes with some guardrails from their parents, etc. Sometimes those things can look scary to parents. So the pulling away, the not talking to them as much, choosing not to go with them to do things that they used to do together, like see a movie, those can be really normal things. But it's hard for parents to know when those are normal things and when to get scared, when to become concerned that those things are becoming dangerous. And I think the more you can stay involved with your kids and give them the distance, so parent from afar, let them do their thing, but check in with their friends when they're over. Check in with your kid frequently. And just know that when you say, you don't look like you're okay today, do you want to talk about it? And they say no, that's normal. But just leave open for them, okay, I still don't think you're okay, and I would love to talk about it when you're ready. They'll come back. Sometimes they'll come back when they're feeling vulnerable. The other thing I would say is it's always on their schedule. You are not going to set the time and place for when they're going to get vulnerable and have a conversation with you. It's going to be suddenly in the backseat of the car you hear a voice that says, I really haven't been okay, and here's why. And that's when you make that drive, that 3-mile drive, into a 30-mile drive. And you keep listening. Those opportunities come, I just guarantee it. You just have to be open and ready.
I love that advice. For young people who might be watching this, teenagers who might be watching this, do you have any advice for them if they're really they're feeling that they're feeling vulnerable or uncomfortable, but they're a little nervous to have that initial sentence that they would have to spit out to their parent to get that conversation going? What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, I would say it's just always awkward to talk to our parents. I watch teens all the time struggle with wanting to connect in some way with their parents, but not really wanting to be told what to do. And so there's a reluctance. I would suggest that maybe if you can set up for your parents a conversation that says, I just want you to listen. I really don't want you to tell me what to do. I just want you to hear me out. Here's what I'm struggling with. And I want to talk about it out loud. I want you to hear me talking about it. If I want some advice, I'll ask for it, but can you just be there for me? That's what I would suggest.
And then inevitably the parent's going to probably want to jump in somehow. So then what's your advice for the parent in that situation after their young person has shared all of that with them?
Yeah, well, if you have created safety as a parent and they start to open up and get vulnerable, you're going to have to turn that voice up in your head that says, just listen, just listening, still just listening, because that's what they want and need. if it looks like they want your advice or they want some sort of reflection from you, ask for permission. Just ask, do you want to hear what I think? And sometimes they'll say no, and you just got to be okay with it. So always remind them, when you do want to hear from me, I'm here. Now, there are times when safety's involved where you will just tell them, and that's okay. You'll say, we're going to get you some help. We know a great therapist, and we're going to sit with you in the first session. That's your time. That's your treat. That's your place where you get to be you, not judged. You're not going to hear from us, and you're going to get a chance to flourish and grow in front of somebody who will just let you be you.
But even in the case that you have a really strong parental bond and a strong family unit, things can happen outside of the parental gaze that then, can...
So I do want to say something to parents who have lost their kid to suicide. And I want to say it's not your fault. And much like cancer, as an adult who had, who might have had a kid with cancer, you as a parent can do everything right. You take them to chemo, you get them into support groups, you change their diet, you make sure they get rest, you do everything you can, and yet you couldn't prevent the stage 4 cancer from taking their life. It's the same with suicide. Suicide is a difficult thing to treat, just like cancer. You can be doing all the right things, and you should. Cancer gets beat all the time. Suicide gets beat all the time, but not every time. And so for those parents who did everything they could, I love what you did. And they had great parents. And they didn't survive, and I'm sorry. So, yeah. And if you have 4 kids, and I do, 1 out of 4 kids is going to think about it seriously. And I don't know that my kids have or haven't, but I thank God they're with me. So, because I know they've all struggled. And sometimes our kids just don't make it. Yeah. They don't. Yeah. And it is like cancer. You can want it so bad, and the kid can want to live so bad, and it just didn't work out. Yeah. So, parents play a powerful role in their teens' lives. Maybe more powerful than they know. But they aren't the only powerful thing in their lives. There are so many other things that have a huge influence over the decisions our kids make that are out of our control. What their friends say to them, the friends that they hang out with, what they see on social media. And, I as a parent, other parents I know, clients I've worked with, really try to monitor all of that as best we can. But it's not perfect. Kids will see things that we don't know about on social media and otherwise. And so we only have so much control, and that's scary. That's hard, but it's the truth.
What do we as adults and parents and lawmakers need to be thinking about and doing when it comes to helping young people with their mental health, whether that be social media or anything else?
Well, when I think about government, public policy, parents, teachers, educators, all the different things that touch and affect our kids and their mental health, I don't know that I have perfect advice, but I would say it's got to start with being non-judgmental. Teens become so aware of themselves, it's like they're on stage all the time. there's a belief with most teens that if they walk in a room, they're the only one getting noticed, and not in positive ways. So they already get all kinds of negative feedback by their own perceptions and beliefs about their bigness in the world. And so we've got to start with non-judgmental stance. And that's to say you get to be exactly who you are, and that's safe. And if I see you putting yourself in danger, I want to be that guardrail. Let me help you so you don't hurt yourself along the way. And that should be true for lawmakers. It should be true for educators. It should be true for our clergy and people in religious life that guide our youth. Start with a non-judgmental space, please, because they believe what you say.
Have you seen positive change in the area of teen mental health in terms of solutions coming out as of, in recent times?
I have noticed more teens describing in sessions, talking about therapy with their friends. And I think that's great, because they'll come into session and say, I was talking about our last session with my best friend, and she said, that made a lot of sense, or, they didn't believe you, or whatever it is, but they're talking about it. They're talking about it as if it was, they were coming to soccer practice. There was nothing different than talking about soccer practice or talking about their session in therapy. They're both good. They're both normal. And my 13-year-old, I heard him talking on FaceTime gaming, and his friend said, "Hey, you want to come out Friday or Wednesday night?" And he said, I have therapy then, but I can at 7. It was like, I have soccer practice, or I have band, or whatever it is. It was just, and the friend didn't go, "Oh, why, dude? Are you, is something really wrong with you?" So.
Do you happen to have any sort of pie in the sky dream for a solution when it comes to teen mental health?
Well, I guess my pie in the sky hope, or my vision or dream, would be that that people don't hopefully think that the challenge of being human will ever get easier. I think when we try to fight just what is, and try to create a world where, say, therapy isn't needed, would be a little bit like saying, let's create a world where parents aren't needed, or doctors aren't needed, or their minister isn't needed. Let's live in reality. Let's understand our reality and give our kids everything they can to be successful. And I really believe therapy for many, many kids helps them navigate the world today. And so I would hope any kid that wants therapy, or is struggling, doesn't even know therapy is an option, that their parents know enough to say, let's get you in and have somebody to talk to you about this. And that they get that care, that non-judgmental, kind of secure and supportive space they need to grow and get through what's hard about being human in this world. The challenge of being human will never get easier. As a parent, as a teacher, as a concerned neighbor, never be afraid to ask a teenager or anyone else if they're thinking about hurting themselves. It seems like an invasive question. It is. It probably feels like sometimes it's none of your business. It is. Just ask the question. Sometimes kids want to admit they are. And you can help them get to the right resource or create the right plan that will get them through a hard time, get them to the other side of that hard time, and they'll feel differently. And you may have saved their lives.